We are live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Energy Realities podcast with Tammy Neiman. How are you today, Tammy?
I'm doing good. Surviving the UK lack of wind. It's great.
Oh, is it very bad?
It's okay.
And we have David Blackman. How are you today, David?
I'm wonderful, and the wind's blowing just fine in Texas. Thank you for asking.
And Stuart Turley. Stu, is the wind blowing where you are?
No, the wind's not blowing, but I noticed that Bruce Willis and I have the same barber. So, I think I'm a little better looking than he is, but I'm a lot less rich. So we're going to have a great day today.
And you haven't died hard 3 times or 4.
I think there were 7 of those movies. Well, no, 5.
5.
Oh, my God.
I love his lines, though, Irina. He's got great lines. Water's wet, wind blows.
That was from Fifth Element. That was a sci-fi movie.
Love that one.
A good one. Yeah, they had flying cars, but they didn't have wind turbines. And today we're talking about wind. Wind blows, but does it blow all the time? And I would like to begin by sharing my screen. Let me see if it will work this time. Stu, can you add it to the screen?
Yeah, here we go.
Thank you. So that's a screenshot from Electricity Maps. It's a screenshot I took a couple of days ago in the afternoon. Would you care to discuss this screenshot, especially after proud reports that last year 20% of the UK's power came from wind? Who'd like to start, Tammy?
Well, when you consider that the nameplate power for Great Britain is one thing, it's another when you have to multiply that by 3 and then add power stations to it in order to maintain the wind. So just because you have a nameplate on a wind turbine does not mean boo.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
didn't the UK Prime Minister just say that he was going to have AI and nuclear, and yet he can't get it going? What was that all about, too?
Right. So this is the conundrum for the energy transition, where it's basically you have 2 grids because you always have to have enough to back up when it's not working. And even the battery installations, the few that they have, it lasts like a couple minutes, right? So you end up having to do this massive overbuild to produce the same amount of electricity that you would have had if you hadn't built all the renewable. I should correct that. They have the hydro, but they would not have to build out all the wind and solar that they're doing that is so unreliable. And, they have these ideas that they'll bring in these flywheels or they'll do, and, that's a 19th century technology. So once again, it's regressing back to how things were during the Victorian period, but at least the Victorians could build stuff and get things done. You can't even say that now. This nuclear power plant at Hinkley Point's been in construction for almost, 15 years or close to 20. I don't know. It's a really long time. And part of the problem is you get lawfare in there. So every step of the way, there's some kind of court case, there's badgers, there's, you might contaminate fish if you're pulling water in, or you're going to kill fish. And so therefore now they have to make some wetlands to compensate. I mean, it's ridiculous. So how can, I think the solution that the UK government is turning to, like so many others in Europe, is interconnectors. Well, as we've seen, interconnectors aren't necessarily safe. So they talk about energy security, but there's been cases over the past month or so where, data interconnectors have been disrupted or broken in, up by the North Sea and in the Baltic region or whatever. So, I mean, how safe is that? If you want to take somebody out, you just stop their interconnector.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, you look at this chart and you see that gas was super, that's what was keeping the lights on.
Exactly.
And by 2030, we're supposed to have gas. And I'll talk about AI in a minute, but I'll let David and Irina have a shot.
David?
Well, yeah, to me, the big scandal on this chart is the fact that you have so much solar installed on an island where the sun doesn't shine about 2/3 of the time. I mean, why are you doing? Talk about a misallocation of capital resources. There it is. And then you've got wind with an installed capacity that's about 8 times the size of what it's actually generating, which is probably pretty typical for Great Britain. And as Tammy noted, I mean, what you have here is a situation just like we have in Texas, California, and all over the United States, which is you are building and maintaining and paying for 2 separate power grids. You have the renewable power grid that everybody likes to virtue signal about, that doesn't really do much. And then you have the power grid that keeps the lights on. That's, in Great Britain, it's mainly natural gas with some nuclear, virtually no coal anymore. And then my other comment on this is that remarkable last bit of data called unknown, in which you have installed capacity of roughly 5 gigawatts. If it's unknown, though, how do you know it? How do you know you got 5? I mean, it's
that
unknown.
was so odd.
What is that? I don't even know what that is. So
those are aliens, illegal aliens on treadmills, David.
The aliens, yeah.
Maybe rules of solar or something. That's a good question because all countries have this unknown category.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I mean, we don't. ERCOT in Texas doesn't have an unknown category, so I don't know what that is.
Maybe that's burning the wood pellets.
No, that's biomass right at the top.
Oh, okay.
And I guess you have to also classify biomass as part of the real actual power generation grid that keeps the lights on. But as Tammy notes, the goals of the Labour Party and previously the Tories in Great Britain is to have no natural gas by 2030, is it? I think it's 2030, right?
Yeah, 2030.
So what are you going to do when you eliminate all the natural gas? How are you gonna live in Great Britain? It makes no sense. This whole thing makes no sense.
Flywheels.
Okay.
And the very fact that somebody expects flywheels or battery storage, which has a question mark next to it on this chart, are going to do the job of gas, as gas was doing this job on the 10th of January, is just preposterous to me. And by the way, did you see the news reports that the Labour Party is starting to grow cold towards Ed Miliband? They thought he was going to be kind of practical about energy, and they were unpleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
Shocking.
It's shocking.
Yeah. But it's good that there is some semblance of, common sense, some remnants, should I say. Could be cause for hope.
But he's an ideological kind of guy in this space. And so I don't see how coal would even come into his vocabulary.
Well, isn't he?
Yeah,
Maybe he got some in his stocking.
He can't spell coal? Nice.
He's basically Great Britain's equivalent to Mark Carney in Canada, right? I mean, and John Kerry in the United States.
John Kerry. He's like John Kerry.
Yeah.
Podesta.
Yeah.
Podesta
Carney's more like
money,
Podesta.
I think.
But don't you have to say that it's really no wonder, given that chart and all the misallocation of resources and capital investments that have been made, that we almost had a blackout situation on the grid in the UK. What was it, last Tuesday or Wednesday?
Yeah.
Yeah, you sent over that story. You can't, and that's going to just become more and more common, isn't it? I don't know how you avoid it. Even the wind blows sporadically in Great Britain. It's not like building it out in West Texas where it blows most days pretty well. and then you're spending all this money on solar on an island that's has pretty strong cloud cover most days. It's just mind-boggling that these institutional investors continue to allocate all of this capital to these projects when we see in real time the impacts of trying to structure a grid like this. It's just wild.
Well, I mean, one of the things that they're doing here in the UK is they're taking prime farmland and putting the solar arrays across the fields, right? And, there's something to be said for the argument that maybe one of the reasons why the inheritance tax in the UK has been extended to farming, which before it was exempt, is to put these farms out of business, because we're coming up to a point where there's succession for the farms, and because farmers are older, clearly, and if they want to leave it to their children or whatever, they'll now be hit with this ridiculous inheritance tax. Property values in the UK are so high that just a really small farm with some outbuildings is already double the limit for what the inheritance tax is. I think it's something like, if it's over £1.5 million, well, I mean, land here is crazy, and it doesn't take much to go over that limit. And so, these families will be stuck with several £100,000 they have to pay in cash to the government when their parents die and want to bequeath it to their children. Whereas before, they could just, they would take over the farm and it would continue in the family. And so the farmers are arguing, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to, there's no way we can afford to make those payments. And so then some people are suggesting that this is intentional so that they can't pay for it. And then institutional investors will come in and purchase the land, either to put the solar panels across the good farmland, or to turn it into basically big, large farms that are rented out to people. So
I think it's
which
also a combination, Tammy, of control, so they can have institutional farmers there so they can control the food. When
possibly,
you control
yeah.
the
I mean,
food,
that's another.
you control the population.
The Bill Gates.
Why is the United
No, please continue.
Why has the United States had 300 food processing plants self-combust in the last several years? Why is China owning 300,000 acres of farmland now? It does not make sense.
Right. So, I mean, with respect to China owning land, a lot of that is, I hate to say it, probably money laundering. So if I know this is the case in Canada, where they purchase land as a means to funnel money through and clean it, whatever. So that there's that possibility. But, in the UK, if I can bring it back to what David and Stu had mentioned about the AI that was announced today or yesterday or something, I was just quickly looking through what they're proposing. And it sounds like they're going to put AI in charge of policy, and which is hilarious. I couldn't believe it.
Well.
It was just like, the AI will come up with policy options and make it more efficient to free up people to do other stuff. I'm like, what?
Okay, these people are just not serious. This
Right.
is not serious. No.
How could it be? But this is their plan. They're going to start building it out at Culham, which isn't far from where I live, which is also where the nuclear authorities are in the UK, if that's any relevant. But what's interesting is this: when the potential came last week for the grid to fail, they do have demand control measures, which means they start cutting people off.
Yeah.
And there's a prioritization of who gets cut off. So once you have AI on the grid, and then maybe they're going to have independent power generation like they're talking about in America and in Canada and whatnot, but I doubt it. You never know with the UK, but okay, so let's say they don't. And let's say AI's on the grid. They're going to have priority because they're managing stuff, right? They're more important than your grandma, who is going to be freezing because she has no power, because they forced her to take out her gas heater, right?
Yeah.
So then you get this, how is that prioritization going to work if they're going to build out all this AI like they're talking about? And apparently they're investing at least 12 billion pounds. I don't know. It was a really large number. At the same time, they're saying they don't have enough money. They have to raise taxes and they have to cut off benefits to old people to keep warm. So that's the priorities of the Labour government, not people.
Yes, well, they do need a lot of money to make even a fraction of what they're planning work, and it will still not work. But regarding food, based on Clarkson's farm, the government is already dictating what farmers should grow if they want to get some grants. So
Yeah.
there is already a fairly serious level of control of the food chain. What gets me, what I don't really understand is when these institutional investors take over the farms, because this sounds like a quite likely prospect. And they put these solar panels or even onshore wind on this farmland, and it does not perform at peak capabilities. The only way they can reasonably expect to make money from these projects is with subsidies.
Yes.
Tammy, the astonishing 380 million for not generating electricity, marking a historic high last year. 101.86 billion paid to a Scottish wind farm.
That's one of my headlines today. Yes,
for not unbelievable for not producing
generating
energy.
power. Yep. They get paid for not producing energy.
Wow.
Well,
Now,
they get paid to continue operating these turbines, even if they cannot produce electricity because there's no demand.
So
They are
curtailment.
being bailed out on a chronic, on a chronic basis.
Right.
Which, to be fair, is rather similar to what's happening to coal and gas power plants, because they have to be paid to continue existing
Right.
for such a time when demand calls for reliable power. But in this case, we have waste of already generated electricity from the wind farm.
Curtailments, right?
Curtailment. Yeah, and they're getting paid for this. Which, as we remember last year, led to manipulation of the data. Remember when a few wind farm operators got paid unfair sums because they estimated that they curtailed a lot more than they actually curtailed.
Yeah. It's the Enron model.
Yeah. So, honestly, what this kind of goes back to is what Meredith Angwin had talked about in her book, Shorting the Grid, where it's when they changed how these prices and by changing how they develop the pricing system affects what ends up on the grid and the instability of the grid. There was a time, and I hate to be one of these, I'm looking back in the past, but there was a time when you had long-term contracts so that you had a steady rate. You knew what you had to afford in order to keep the lights on and make sure things were operating efficiently and effectively. And you could do the maintenance because you had a steady idea of what the price was. And as much as I'm a market-based person, I think market-based electricity, I don't think that always works. And I think of, the UK model is a disaster. The EU model doesn't really work. What goes on in Texas and whatnot, I'm not really sure that's the most effective, but please tell me if I'm wrong.
No, I mean, our model's very little different in Texas than the California model. It's all based on Enron's model that led to the greatest energy fraud in American history. That's how California and Texas both structured their power grids, and it's awful. And it's our utility rates Then at the same time, they imposed a 15% target for renewable energy focused on wind. This was in 2001. And so since that time, our utility rates have skyrocketed. We begin to suffer blackouts and brownouts and rolling blackouts that are managed, just like California does. We have all the capacity in the world that we need, but it's completely mismanaged by ERCOT and our regulators, and it's all Republicans doing it. And that's the grand irony of this. We blame the Democrats for California, which is an even bigger fiasco, much bigger fiasco than Texas. But Texas is fortunate because at least our Republican government here hasn't chosen to start shutting down natural gas power plants needlessly like they have in California and stupidly, or our nuclear facilities. And so, but our model is essentially the same the way the market works. So it's really bad. It's terrible. And we never had blackout issues. We never had power shortage issues in Texas at all before the legislature decided to adopt that model in the 2001 session.
Yeah.
David, what scares me, though, is the demand in Texas and ERCOT is expected to double in the next 5 years.
Well,
it took 100 years for the grid.
Massive overstatement. It's going to be more like 20 or 30%. But yeah.
That's still, let's take 20%. Increasing 20% demand on the Texas ERCOT will not happen very conveniently without large investments in natural gas pipeline. I mean, in natural gas power plants. Yeah, coal will not get approved. So it's going to get ugly. And I believe the UK is just going to be just as bad.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a lot better shape than most places in Texas. That's the grand irony of it. Even with our horrible market model, we're in a lot better shape because our legislature has at least been wise enough not to disadvantage gas.
And it's not made up of Californians.
Right. Yes, exactly. Anyway, our power grid problems in the United States are a bipartisan issue. I spent a lot of time slamming Democrats because that's who runs California and Northeastern grid up in New England, which is far worse than Texas. And but in reality, Republicans in Texas have completely mismanaged our grid. Eventually, they're going to pay a huge political price for that. We're going to have another huge cold snap this coming weekend, in which temperatures are going to stay well below freezing for 3 or 4 days. And it's going to put a strain on our grid, and we'll see how we do. But if we should have blackouts again, like we did in 2021, then, people here in this state are going to start getting fed up. The state's been run by Republicans exclusively for 30 years now. And if we continue to have these hiccups on the grid in which people get killed, 300 people died in 2021 during that massive winter storm. Eventually there's going to be a big price to pay, and we'll do even worse because we'll start electing Democrats, and then things will get really, really bad. So I criticize the Republicans just out of a sense of self-defense and praying that they start getting these things right, which I think everyone in the UK needs to start doing too, obviously.
But aren't they prepared? I mean, if the forecast said there will be frigid weather during the weekend, isn't they prepared to handle it?
Yes.
You have to risk.
Right, because they did learn some lessons out of the 2021 storm, or Uri. And they did go about forcing plants to winterize themselves, and pipelines and compressor stations. And so since then, when we've had big freezes the last 3 years, the natural gas system hasn't failed at all. Wind and solar still drop off because they're useless when the weather's bad, and everybody knows that. And so you have to plan for that. And the failure in Uri was not reinforcing the natural gas power grid to kick in a big time way and not freeze up when wind and solar fail, which they're going to do. And so since then, we have fortified the grid and built a lot more solar capacity. So if it's not snowing and the sun's shining, we're still going to get some kick in from solar. But the wind turbines are going to freeze up out in West Texas like they always do, and you just have to plan for that. Unfortunately, part of planning for that is building a dual grid, a double grid, and all the capital costs that ratepayers have to pay for that. And so my electric bill since 2020 has doubled at my home because of that. And it's bad planning on the part of the Republicans in the legislature and the governors from Bush through this current governor. And, it's all Republicans. So when things fail, they're going to get the blame, and they should.
Well, we should try and hold them accountable. There was one comment at the beginning. Somebody asked, how are people putting up with this in the UK? Population ignorance? Well, I'd say yes. People don't know how the grid works. We've talked about this before.
You could go, the last comment there by Patrick, where he says the UK is more concerned about freezing out pensioners and arresting people for criticizing violent street behavior than for providing reliable energy.
Yes, the government, but the regular people, why are they putting up with this?
Well, it's like you say, Irina, I think a lot of people don't understand the grid. There's some people who firmly believe that renewable is the way to go, and that these are just sacrifices that have to be made. And, that's a sad testament, but it's also sort of the British mentality is not to, to keep calm and carry on, is their motto kind of thing. When they remember that from the war, and it's kind of been instilled in the people. But
in this case, keep cold and try to carry on.
Right, but when I talk to some of the old people, it's like, oh well, I'm not going to complain. I'm just going to put another sweater on. Why don't people just wear more sweaters? And I'm like, well, you shouldn't have to. This is a modern, because your house is 12 degrees Celsius inside. I mean, really? So, I don't know. There's this tension, I think, between people who think they're complaining and being ungrateful if they push back on this, and other people who say this is crazy. And unfortunately, the people who say this is crazy aren't getting the same kind of influence as the others do. And it goes back to the Uniparty, right? The Conservatives took them down this road. They never got rid of the Climate Change Committee when they formed government under David Cameron. They kept it. They kept all of this garbage. They pursued net zero quicker. Everyone thought Boris Johnson was going to be helpful. He was pro-Brexit and all that kind of thing. And then he doubled down with the Glasgow Climate Conference, and we're going to go faster and all that kind of stuff. So,
but what about these people who you said? Some people think that it would seem ungrateful if they complain. Ungrateful to whom? To the people who you keep in their jobs by paying your taxes?
I know. I don't understand it, Irina.
But what I find puzzling is the fact that these people, these green transition pushers, promised lower electricity bills, and instead they are skyrocketing. Okay, believe whatever you want, believe in sacrifices that need to be made, but how do they square this circle?
Right. No, go ahead.
Was this the article you were talking about? You put in the chat, I believe.
Right. So this is the new AI plan, and it's 14 billion like what the government's going to put in. And then they're saying that industry will put in another 25 billion. And if you scroll down on that one, he talks about how they're going to have an AI growth zones, and then an AI energy council. And the AI energy council will be formed, some point in the spring, where they're going to talk about expert insight into the energy needs. Well, I don't think you need to be a super expert to understand they need a lot of energy, and it needs to be reliable. It can't be, gee, the wind's not blowing today, I got to wait for my interconnection. You're going to need something dedicated. So now they're talking SMRs. Well, they've been talking SMRs forever. And
Wow.
how long does that take to build? All right, maybe at the Cullum Center, maybe they've got an experimental one that maybe they can tap into, but there's a lot of maybes there. And then with the AI growth zones, they're talking about, well, because we're going to designate them a growth zone and that this is super important for the national future, we're going to run roughshod over the planning process. So it's going to be expedited planning to develop whatever energy is required for the AI. But because UK is also signing on to and implementing the sustainability standards, if an AI company needs to use natural gas, which is reliable, they're going to have to offset in some way with renewable in order to get their emissions down. So what does that mean? Are they then going to say, well, we're going to have a nice natural gas power plant or an SMR whenever it's ready, and so we're going to offset that by building up wind and solar on some field somewhere. So
I think the UK is winning the battle with Germany over who is more idiotic.
Who's going to collapse first?
Tammy, what you just said, Tammy, about this AI plan definitely puts them in the lead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Patrick brings up a great point. Tammy, they will make sure the AI load centers have ample, reliable energy and even make a priority of over other loads. Yeah. This is going to bring up a whole new business model that is already happening, and that is microgrids. Microgrids are going to happen for those businesses that can afford it. Those costs are going to be associated and then put onto goods and services, and you're going to see self-preserving microgrids come into play, and those that cannot afford it are not going to have power. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, Patrick, that's what I said earlier about prioritization on the grid. So if they don't have their own bespoke energy production, like let's say they build their own little micro natural gas generator in order to keep the AI data center going. And in the document, they're talking about starting out at 250 megawatts, and then they'll need to expand to 500 megawatts, and that's at one site. So, and then it's like, okay, so what size of power plant do you need for that for reliable energy? Well, it's going to need to be natural gas, or it's going to be an SMR. The small ones are around 300 megawatts, I guess. But I mean, none of them are operational in Europe yet. And the UK, their processes take forever. So when do they plan on having that? And they want this AI like tomorrow. So I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, and so the other big overriding thing that we all have to think about is there's only so big a pool of capital available for power generation needs, right? I mean, there's a limit to how much investors are going to be willing to put into power generation capacity. And so when you have big businesses who can afford to contract for their own nuclear power, their own natural gas power plants that are dedicated to their business operations, that is inevitably going to create a situation in which the public power grid struggles to maintain adequate capacity in the future. Yeah. And it's going to be a real tension in the system because there's just a limited pool of capital that's going to go into these power projects. And so policymakers are going to really have to struggle with this in the UK and everywhere else. Because in order to prevent the public power grid from just running out of capacity to meet their customer needs.
We've all kind of alluded to something that has really kind of I've been talking to George McMillan for several weeks now, and I've got about 30-40 hours worth of interviews that we've done.
Stuff. That guy's brilliant.
He is brilliant. And what we're seeing, thank you, David, that I have to have great guests on my show because they're a lot smarter. I'm better looking than he is, but he's brilliant. And here's the thing. Germany is failing. Germany is deindustrializing. Germany went down the wind and solar. And then what is the German word for wind stopping? bless you, whatever that was. And so that is stopped. And now we have total deindustrialization going on in Germany. Germany, the new German Chancellor Schultz, who I joke all the time, I see nothing, because his ancestor used to be on a TV show, and he is now being voted out. And then when you have his new replacement coming in, she's already calling for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to be activated.
Yeah.
We're already laughing about rumors from a Slavic country president saying that a U.S. company will be buying the Nord Stream pipeline remains and then firing it up because they're trying to get all this going. If Germany does not get low cost Russian natural gas, it will have a regime change, period. You're going to see people change and get upset over low cost energy. I think 2025 is going to be a very big year for people to wake up and realize that the Green New Deal is a scam. Net zero is a scam and is a wealth transfer. Did I just get us all canceled? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned for Europe, that's not going to happen if Thierry Breton gets his way, right?
Yeah.
Because
But he's not in the EU anymore.
But I
He
think
got
he's
fired.
right. But I think there's still that attitude. The fact that he
Yeah.
said,
Oh. The attitude is that,
About
but
Romania.
it will be way too obvious. I mean, they can't pull it off twice in Romania.
but they're going to do it to Germany if they don't get the outcome they want.
Well, they didn't succeed in Georgia either, and I take this as a good sign. If they try to do something like this in Germany, it will start stinking.
And they're going to have to think there's a
Even
different
if the
president
Germans
in the
don't
United
revolt,
States now, too.
It will really, really stink, and it will be really obvious. Although apparently they don't have a problem with being obvious.
Yeah.
These people, because
Guys,
they don't
if
really
the
come
EU
to any-
continues to cancel elections fraudulently like they did in Romania, the Trump administration is going to aggressively react to that. And by aggressively react to it, I mean you're going to start losing funding for things like NATO and all these other EU priority items until that BS stops.
But David, isn't that meddling?
That's
Yes.
meddling.
Yes.
And I
But these
personally
white
want to.
guys doing it, so that's okay, right?
Yes. Right.
I love this world. Yeah.
I would personally like to see the United States out of NATO totally. I would like to see the United States out of the UN totally, and then renegotiate our way back in so that we could come back in with new operating. First, throw the UN out because they're the number one source of problems for trafficking humans around the world. Throw them out. So
Yeah, I agree. Let's renegotiate everything.
it's going to get entertaining, folks.
No, these organizations have basically outlived their
Their
usefulness.
usefulness. Yeah, I agree.
And Gail brings
know.
up a great point.
Right,
Doomberg
so-
argues that AI centers, we love Doomberg. I've had 4 conversations with him, and David is a great one getting us hooked up with him. So argues that AI data centers will be operated independently with natural gas. And Michael Mahaffrey, now we're reverting all back to coal in Germany.
Yes, they are.
Coal is king. Coal mines are going, and it can be done cleaner than in the past.
No, you didn't.
know
You
that.
didn't just say that.
No,
Patrick.
I did not put
Didn't
that
say
up there. Sorry, Patrick.
So I would argue, I agree with Doomberg that in North America, that's what will happen is the AI centers will have their own separate power generation, just like a lot of institutions used to have like a power plant attached to them to ensure reliable electricity. But what concerns me in the UK with the sustainability standards is that if they do that, they have to offset. Now, how are they going to offset? Does that mean then that they build up the wind and solar for the country in which they're operating, does it mean that they're buying carbon credits elsewhere in order to make up for what it is that because they're technically polluting, or whatever they want to call emissions these days? So if for the UK and Europe, I think the situation might be a little bit different than what will transpire in North America. But David, when you made the point about investment money, one of the most disturbing changes that they want to introduce in the UK is that the different counties in the UK have pension plans, and each pension plan does their own thing. Now the UK government wants them to pool all the pension plans so that they can make investments in things like energy infrastructure, like AI data centers. So they're going to take the public pensions, put them into these, somewhat questionable investments because they have no other money. And then when it fails, what's going to happen? Right? People are going to lose their pensions. And it's like in Canada, the finance minister, before she resigned, changed some of the limits of the Canada Pension Plan. Before, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Fund could only or own a 30% controlling interest of a company, and she removed that limit. Why? So that they could make these more risky investments and have, almost full control over a company in order to assert whatever priorities they have with respect to the transition. So I think people need to be worried about where their pension money is going.
Oh yeah, they do need to
and
be
think about. So, the Labor Party is a bunch of communists, and that's exactly what you should expect communists to do: is centralize and pool everything like that, so the government can manipulate it. And so it just goes back to the overriding point that many people have pointed out about the whole green energy scam, is that the energy transition is just a plot to advance socialism globally. I mean, it just is. And transfer wealth to the elite classes from the poorer classes, which is exactly what's happening. And everything they do is designed to create that end goal. And, it's going to slow down in the United States to some extent over the next 4 years. But unfortunately, it's speeding up. We see it accelerating in England. We see it accelerating in Germany, and even at the cost of collapsing the economies. And it's just wow. It's just so insane. So insane.
For any of the EU folks that are, or excuse me, the UK folks that are watching this podcast and want to go after David Blackman, remember that he is from Texas.
You can find me at Substack, yeah.
You can find him on Substack, but we know a lot of people in Texas, and come on, we'll be there.
Saying?
If I may just make one correction.
If they want to show up, please.
Socialism, because we're 43 minutes in and we have headlines to address. I just wanted to note that, David, you talk about socialism, but socialism is built on the premise that everyone is equal, and we have been talking about being equally poor. But this will not be the case, people, because those power generators, like that something energy in the UK, they are making good money from unreliable energy, supplying unreliable energy to people. They will not be equal to the rest of us. So socialism remains elusive, but totalitarianism, on the other hand, has been tried. It works for a certain period of time, and then it fails, but nobody cares about that because there's money to be made. Yes, please go on.
So Patrick has a great comment here. Patrick Devine says, the Social Security Fund in the US is funded by a separate payroll tax. It's not part of the federal budget, but the US government has tapped the fund. And they always threaten to delay Social Security payments whenever an annual budget is not approved.
Right.
Yes.
Scare the old folks first.
And Social Security has been robbed by the Democrats to even fund President Trump's first impeachment. So it is a piggy bank that has been robbed by the rhinos and Republican Democrats. It's disgusting. Anyway, here is Tammy's news stories.
Okay, so the first one in Unheard is about the near miss blackout last week, and Catherine Porter, who is an expert on all things kind of UK grid, she's got a great blog called What Logic, and she had tweeted out and written a blog post about this near miss, and then the the National Electric System Operator, or NESO, which is now under control of the government, came out and said she was wrong. But when they were pressed to say, well, what part is she wrong? They couldn't actually explain why she was wrong. They just said, oh, no, she's wrong. And it's a really great article if you want a better understanding of how they came to almost having to use demand control, which is cutting off people. Some of the demand control measures the UK has instituted is that they will ask you to curtail, you as an individual in your household, to curtail your electricity use, and then they'll pay you money to do so. But it's like pennies per kilowatt hour or something. So it's really not worth it for a lot of people who tried. They're like, actually, no, I didn't like being so cold. I didn't like not having to do my wash. So no, I'm not going to do that again. And then the second article is unrelated to the wind energy in a way, but it's this fantastic article in the C2C Journal written by a former litigator about how the Canadian Supreme Court screwed up when they gave a decision about whether or not the Canada's carbon tax was constitutional. Now, it was a reference case, which means it was just supposed to be referring to that question of whether or not it was constitutional. But in explaining how they arrived at their idea in this really kind of circuitous way, they made a statement that the climate change crisis was an existential threat. And so this article explains how this court case is being used wrongly as a precedent for other court cases in Canada regarding climate change, and how it's really being exploited by various activist groups in order to get courts to rule on any kind of things that aren't in alignment with whatever the energy transition the Liberal NDP government wants. So for Canadians out there and even Americans who want to understand how court cases can be exploited and manipulated, this is a really great article.
Cool. And your Substack is?
The nemothreport.substack.com, and I'll have another article this week.
All right. Mr. Blackman.
Oh, well, okay. So I'm going to go the second one first. The collapse of the UN Net Zero Alliance last week. BlackRock and State Street leaked information indicating they're about to pull out of the UN Net Zero Alliance, where pretty much every major American bank has pulled out of this thing over the last month. It's completely collapsing. It's a group of, it was set up by the United Nations to as a forum for banks and investment houses like BlackRock to boast about their green energy virtue signaling. And it's all collapsing because everyone understands that zero is not attainable. And the whole ESG philosophy has become a cuss word, especially in the United States. And so nobody wants to talk about it anymore, which that's all great news for everyone concerned. And it hopefully will have a result of a more rational distribution of capital for energy projects. Trump promises to unban Biden's huge offshore drilling ban. That's a piece I wrote for the Daily Caller. That one is, Biden set aside all the Atlantic coast, all the Pacific coast, a big part of the Bering Sea, and the eastern Gulf of Mexico off limits to future leasing and drilling, using the provisions of the Offshore Land Leasing Act of 1953. Trump immediately promised to unban it. I'm not sure how he's going to do that because the provisions in the OCSLA are a little difficult to see how he's going to just do that with an executive order. Frankly, I think it's going to take an act of Congress to unban those areas. So we'll see how all that goes, but it's going to be a real controversy in the early days of the Trump administration.
And your Substack?
Well, yes, I'm at Energy Transition Absurdities. You just go to David Blackman or blackman.substack.com, and you're going to land right there on that landing page. Love to see you there.
Oops.
I'm done.
And then when Irina has 2 slides here, discarded wind energy. I'm not sure where that came from.
That's from my second link, the one we mentioned and Tammy mentioned in the comments, that wind turbine operators were paid more when they were not sending electricity into the grid than they were when they were sending electricity into the grid, because curtailment increased by 91% last year, because there is no way to expand the grid, the transmission network, to make it possible to incorporate all this newly generated electricity from new wind turbines and take it to consumer. And I think this is complete insanity, because you're paying these companies to waste the energy that they are producing because you can't take it to consumers, but you can't let them go bankrupt, because there will be no one to generate electricity to turn on the turbines when there is wind.
Wow.
It's completely horrible.
Wow.
But apparently all that's missing are some batteries.
More of these before they expand transmission lines. They keep putting the cart in front of the horse, and they see nothing wrong with it. It's not just the UK.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that.
Oh, yes. And in more horrible news, the EU's 2024 new wind capacity was less than half than was needed for climate goals. It's a real tragedy. Yeah, we didn't build enough wind.
The slackers in the EU.
Those
Holy
are
smokes.
slackers. And of course, it's permitting.
Yeah,
It's the
that's what they'll
government's
blame.
fault. The government is doing everything in its powers to throw money at wind farm developers, wind turbine developers. And these people are still not happy. They
Wow.
want
People don't want it in their backyard. And I think they're honestly running out of where to put them. I mean, when we did our trip in Germany over the summer, it was insane. Sorry?
Yeah. Imagine that land is finite, actually. There are limits to available land where you can stick a wind turbine. But I think they're really, all of these people, wind and solar developers, they really like to complain about permitting. Do they want to just be able to decide to stick a wind turbine right there? And
yes, because they know better.
Without any red tape at all? Because I think that's what they want.
Exactly. That's
And
exactly
they're going
what.
to get it.
Yeah.
Well, hey, in the UK, the AI will probably make that decision.
What?
If they
Just
can get
ask
it
Grok.
up and running, for which they will need gas, so it's really problematic. Yeah, I'm done.
And who programs the AI?
Yeah. So the AI will be like, I need reliable gas. So the rest of you, I'm going to tell you we're going to build wind turbines here, here, and here. Self-preservation.
I love it.
It's a circus.
Real quick, while we go through this is shorting the grid that was mentioned earlier by Tammy. I absolutely love the electric grandma. She is phenomenal. Go to her energy Substack, and it is phenomenal. As you can tell, the book, I went through this like you wouldn't believe. This is a phenomenal book. And if you're a grid balancing authority, I'm going to have to check your alcohol content drinking because you guys earn your money trying to balance the grid. Holy smokes. Okay, back to this. Sorry about that. Trump is to issue a 6-month moratorium on offshore wind projects. And I got really tickled at some of his comments. He goes, the president-elect, whose inauguration is set for January 20th, has stated he's calling the wind turbines like dropping garbage in a field, and the wind turbines themselves are rusting, rotting, closed, and falling down. You gotta love President Trump for entertainment value.
Oh, yes.
And then when you sit back and take a look, tougher U.S. sanctions by President Biden. Why did President Biden have all the sanctions on the Russian oil and do nothing to enforce them for Iran, Iraq? And you take a look at the imports for California, as California is burning down right now. California last year imported 73,000 barrels. I mean, I believe it was like 2% or 3% of their oil came from sanctioned countries. Why is it? That's hypocrisy at its finest. And then what do the oil and gas exports mean to the Russian economy? I'll tell you what, this is an amazing thing when you consider shipping company, and I cannot pronounce this, half Okie, half Texan speaking Russian is not good.
Which one?
Sovcomfort.
Sovcomfort. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Shipping company, the biggest carrier of Russian oil. 183 vessels believed to be part of the shadow fleet. The shadow fleet is estimated to be around 800 vessels. And they just added 183 new vessels, 20 foreign trading companies that are selling Russian oil, and dozens of Russian energy ministry. Why did the Biden administration choose to do this now when they raided the SPR to sell to keep our gas down,
Yes,
but they want to have higher?
Yes, sir. I know.
Go ahead.
Because they don't care about price at the pump anymore, because they are going out of the White House. Yes. And they want to, stick it to Trump by making oil more expensive.
Exactly.
I knew and Irina, I knew I loved you. You are absolutely brilliant. And I continue to steal this. Now, one of the key things is, as Putin, as George McMillan has been saying, and this is critical information, Putin has won. He has to do nothing. And if he does nothing, this is from him, not me. I'm too stupid to come up with this. If President Trump is now in a really bad situation to try to end the war, President Putin is now moving all of his natural gas to Asia. And if he does that, he is going to continue. He has increased, I believe it's now 37% of his GDP is energy exports. And you take a look at the agricultural exports, the world needs Russian food very badly. So,
well, fertilizers at least.
Yeah.
Do what now?
Fertilizers. They're much cheaper than what the European producers are making.
I'll tell you what, if we don't realize that natural gas is going to be the way that 2025, we're going to watch, bookmark this podcast. 2025 is going to be the year of the natural gas power plants. Yeah. Take a look at Vietnam. They just had their LNG to power plant come online. Those are going to be very critical coming along in the near future. This is my Substack, the Energy News Beat Substack. Had a great interview with this good-looking gentleman, David Blackman, the other day. And he is very, very sharp, and I do appreciate it. But I do have something we got 1 minute, and this is something. Can your cats do this? I feel like a worthless she checks out, and all of a sudden the dog starts doing all this. Okay, I'm a worthless pet home. Look at this.
Wow.
No way. Is that for real? Is that dog really doing that?
Yes.
Or is it all
Really?
script? Oh, come on.
Oh, no way.
Watch this. Okay, I got a mini Australian Shepherd, and who trains who? She trained me, man.
Wow. That must have taken a long time to train.
Yeah. But it was possible.
Look at this.
I don't think. Oh, poor thing.
Hey,
Oh,
come
come
on,
on.
cats sit on the Roomba and help.
Oh, okay. Now, so cats sit on the room.
Cats do not stoop so low as to do house chores.
No cat would ever do any of that.
Well, we
They
had
might
an
keep in the laundry
absolute
basket.
wonderful group of comments. Real quick, are the bans in the U.S. OCS water, deep water, still open game because it's international waters? Correct. I witnessed Chevron USA exodus from Ventura, California, offshore back in the 1990s, but there still remains so much recoverable oil reserves. David, you want to go there?
Well, U.S. waters extend 50 miles out. They start at the 3 mile offshore to 50 miles off most states, off Texas. You know, Texas is always different. We got 12 miles of state waters before the federal waters kick in. But yeah, further out than 50 miles is international water. But you still got to get the permits to put the pipelines in to the onshore, right, to move the gas or all onshore. So the federal government still has a lot of say-so.
Laura brings up a great question. Any thoughts on Musk's new role in the administration when it comes to energy? I'm going to take a first stab, and I think that you have Doug Burgum with the Interior. You have Lee Zeldin with the energy, the EPA, and then you have Chris Wright, who I'm over here going, yay, Chris! Chris is absolutely a wonderful human and is going to do great. You have those three amigos. They're going to do great things. And then when Musk with Doge, if Doge has teeth, and I love the logo, a dog, if we can get that dog chewing on the budget, yes, he will have teeth because we can get them information to help reduce the debt. So I think that'll help.
Yeah, I don't think Musk will interfere so much with respect to pursuing more renewable, like wind and solar options and batteries. I mean, he might say in remote areas, the Tesla power banks could be helpful, but I don't know if he'll have that much influence. I think Trump kind of said he wants to keep Musk a bit separated away from those energy policy decisions. So,
but Trump Trump has said publicly, solar is not bad and has a place. And so his first action is those ugly wind farms.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, we all agree with that. It has a place. Of course it
just
does.
not
Wind
as the backbone of a grid.
No.
Right, exactly. It just can't be your whole grid.
Stick to rooftops.
I think
Have a great
Patrick
week,
says
everybody.
all. Have a great week, everybody. This was a great show.
Thank
Stay
y'all,
warm.
This
And
was
no
great.
Thanks,
blackout.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for all the comments. Bye.